When Karoline Leavitt walked onto the set of the Steve Harvey show, the atmosphere was filled with excitement. The audience was eagerly awaiting the insights, the behind-the-scenes stories from the White House, and the charm of a young politician making history. Steve, wearing his trademark smile, was prepared to engage with humor and warmth. But the instant Karoline took her seat, her gaze caught the glimmer of the cross on Steve's chest, and everything seemed to freeze. Space, breath, significance. What began as a casual chat was about to evolve into something profound, because in the following moments, Steve Harvey wouldn't be the one posing questions. He would find himself trying to hold back tears. What Karoline was about to reveal would transform everything, starting with an unexpected declaration. "Steve, I want to share something I've never disclosed on television before." As she dove into her story, comment where you're tuning in from, and remember to subscribe so you won't miss the latest updates. Steve Harvey entered the stage with his iconic smile shining, dressed in a sleek gray suit that fit him perfectly, holding a stack of question cards. The audience erupted in applause, cheers resonating throughout the studio. "Today we have a special guest," Steve announced, his warm voice filled with enthusiasm. "This is the youngest White House press secretary in history, Karoline Leavitt, a young woman who's making waves in the political arena." The applause surged again as Karoline stepped forward, her elegant blue suit highlighting her figure, blonde hair neatly tied back, a bright smile on her face, yet a hint of tension in her eyes. Steve looked at her playfully, saying, "This kid works at the White House. At her age, I was still figuring out how to hold a microphone." The audience burst into laughter, a light-hearted atmosphere enveloping the studio. The stage lights softened as Steve Harvey leaned closer to Karoline Leavitt, his smile still present but his eyes now more focused, eager to delve into the story of the remarkable woman before him. The audience quieted, applause giving way to curiosity. Steve lightly tapped his question cards on his knee, then asked, "Karoline, you're the youngest White House press secretary in history. It sounds like a Hollywood film. How do you navigate that world filled with older professionals and all that pressure?" Karoline chuckled softly, a blend of confidence and humility in her demeanor. "Steve, I grew up in a small town where my family sold ice cream and old trucks. I never imagined I'd be sitting in the White House, but I embrace challenges and believe that hard work can bring about change, regardless of age." Her voice was powerful, yet there was an authenticity to it, as if she were conversing with an old friend. Steve nodded, his hand instinctively brushing the cross on his chest. "I admire that spirit, but I have to ask, what about being a mom? I heard you just welcomed a little boy, right? How do you juggle raising a child and managing a press team at the White House?" He tilted his head, his eyes curious yet compassionate, recalling his own busy days raising 7 children. Karoline laughed more heartily this time, a touch of shyness in her laughter. "It's definitely a challenge. My son, Nico, is small, just a few months old. Some days I'm in meetings with the president's team, and then home changing diapers at midnight. But I cherish both roles. Being a mom teaches me patience, and politics teaches me resilience." She paused, glancing at Steve. "You've got 7 kids, right? How do you keep your sanity?" The audience erupted in laughter, and Steve joined in, his easy chuckle lightening the mood in the studio. "Oh, I lose my sanity often, but I have a trick. Let the kids raise themselves and pray you make it through the day." He winked at the crowd, then became serious. "But for real, Karoline, I admire you. Being a mom is tough. Working at the White House is tougher, and you're so young. There must be some pressure, right?" Karoline nodded, her eyes momentarily darkening. "Yeah, Steve, I face a lot of criticism. People claim I'm too young, inexperienced, that someone like me doesn't belong in politics. Sometimes I question my worth, but then I remind myself that youth isn't a weakness. It's a strength if you know how to harness it." She spoke with conviction, her hands clenched in her lap for emphasis. Steve listened intently, his hand brushing the cross again, his thumb grazing its metal surface. He could sense the strength in her voice, but also a hint of vulnerability, as if she were concealing a larger story. "I understand," he said, his tone deepening. "I've been told I wasn't good enough or smart enough for anything beyond comedy. But how do you push through that? What keeps you standing tall?" Karoline met his gaze, her eyes brightening as if she had found the right person to confide in. "Steve, that's a big question, and honestly, part of the answer relates to you." She paused, allowing the words to linger in the air. The audience began to murmur, and Steve raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Relates to me? What do you mean?" He leaned in closer, his hand leaving the cross, eyes locked on her. She smiled, a blend of gentleness and strength. "Let me explain. One time, I saw you on TV, not in comedy, but when you spoke about life, about faith. I was in a really dark place at that time, and you didn't realize it, but what you said pulled me out." Her voice lowered, thick with emotion, and the stage lights seemed to focus solely on them. Steve sat up straight, his hand unconsciously gripping the question cards. "Wait, are you serious?" he asked, his voice trembling, not from doubt but from astonishment. The audience fell completely silent, sensing the gravity of the moment. Karoline nodded, her eyes fixed on him. "Absolutely serious, Steve. And if you give me a few minutes, I'll tell you how it changed me." Steve took a deep breath, the smile fading from his lips, replaced by curiosity mixed with emotion. "Or ice," he said, his voice warm and low. "I'm all ears." He set the cards down as if understanding that from this moment forward, the interview would deviate from any script. Steve Harvey sat still, hands resting lightly on his knees, eyes focused on Karoline Leavitt. His usual grin had faded, replaced by a blend of curiosity and anticipation. The studio audience hushed. No more whispers, as if sensing this young woman was about to reveal something unexpected. Karoline took a deep breath, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, then began speaking, her voice low but steady. "Steve, you asked what keeps me grounded," she said, looking directly at him. "I want to share a story about a time I wasn't sure I could continue. It was during my congressional run back home. I was young, filled with passion, believing I could make a difference. But then I lost badly." She paused, her lips pressing together as if the memory still stung. Steve tilted his head, his gaze softening. "I understand that feeling," he said quietly. "Losing isn't easy." Karoline nodded, a faint sad smile crossing her face. "Not easy at all. I poured everything into it, traveling, meeting people, advocating for what I believed in. But when the results came in, I didn't just lose the seat. I lost faith in myself. The media didn't hold back. They wrote harsh articles. She's too young, she doesn't know what she's doing, women like her don't belong in politics. Every word felt like a dagger to my self-worth." She lowered her head, her blonde hair falling slightly over her face. I went home, sat in my family's modest living room, staring out the window. It was raining, and I felt like the whole world was collapsing around me. I asked myself, what was it all for? Am I even worthy? I grew up in a normal family, not wealthy, not powerful, no one supporting me. In that moment, I thought maybe they were right. Maybe I wasn't good enough. The audience let out soft. A few young women bowing their heads in empathy. Steve sat up straighter, his hand unconsciously touching the cross on his chest as if seeking an anchor. "Karoline," he said, his voice warm and deep, "you're not the first to feel that way, but how did you overcome it?" She looked up, her eyes brighter, though still trembling. "I didn't overcome it immediately, Steve. I contemplated quitting politics, quitting my dreams. I sat there for hours, not speaking to anyone, not answering my phone. My family was worried, but I didn't want them to see me as weak. I felt like I had let them down, let myself down. Then one night, I turned on the TV, not to watch anything specific, just to fill the silence." She paused, looking at Steve with a meaningful gaze. "And that's when I saw you." Steve raised an eyebrow, surprised. "Saw me? What do you mean?" Karoline smiled, a small but genuine smile. "I don't remember exactly what it was. Maybe an old clip or you addressing an audience. But there you were, on stage in a suit, holding a microphone, talking about life. You said failure isn't the end, it's what shapes us." I was sitting on that worn-out sofa, listening to every word. And for the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope creep into my heart. Steve leaned forward, hands on the table, eyes locked on her. "You're serious?" he asked, his voice shaky, as if he couldn't believe it. "Absolutely serious," Karoline replied, her voice more resolute. "I don't know when you recorded it, but it reached me right when I needed it most. You said,
Sometimes we don't have to be perfect. Just keep moving. Back then, I didn't know if I could get back up.
I had lost, faced criticism, and doubt, but your words were like a beacon in the dark. Tears streamed down my face, not from despair, but because I realized I still had a reason to try. That night, things began to change. The audience was completely silent, some wiping tears, others nodding as her story resonated with them. Steve looked at her, his eyes softening, the playful vibe replaced by sincerity.
"Karoline," he said, his voice rough, "you don't know what that means to me, but how did it change you?" Karoline met his gaze, her eyes filled with emotion. "It gave me the strength to rise again, Steve. I resolved not to let failure define me. I returned to work, joined the president's team, and ended up where I am today. But it all started in that moment with you, with what you said, with the faith you unknowingly passed on." Steve sat still, hand gripping the cross, lips pressed together as if holding back emotion. "I don't know what to say," he whispered, his voice breaking. Karoline smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "You don't have to say anything, Steve, because you've already said enough, and I'm here to thank you." Steve Harvey sat quietly, hand gripping the cross, his eyes reflecting a mixture of shock and emotion. The audience in the studio seemed to hold their breath, feeling the weight of what Karoline Leavitt had just shared. She had opened up about her election loss, and how he had unknowingly become a guiding light in her darkness. Now, her eyes locked onto his as if urging him to understand this wasn't just gratitude. It was a connection beyond what she had ever imagined. "Steve," Karoline said, her voice soft yet powerful, "you need to understand this. That night when I heard you speak, it wasn't just a host I was hearing. It was someone who had walked through dark days like me. Your words were like a hand pulling me out of despair, making me believe I still had a chance to keep going." Steve shifted forward, his hand leaving the cross and resting on the table as if wanting to bridge the gap between them. "You're serious?" he asked, his voice still grappling with the idea that his words had that kind of impact. "I mean, I talk about that stuff a lot, but I didn't think it had reached someone like you." Karoline nodded, a gentle smile spreading across her lips. "I'm serious, Steve. I can't forget that feeling of finally being seen. Not just as the girl the press criticized, but as me, someone who felt lost. You talked about perseverance, and it awakened something in me. I thought if he can do it, then I can too." Steve looked at her, his lips pressed tight as if holding back emotion. "Karoline," he said, his voice trembling, "you really felt that from me?" I just speak from my heart, that's all." She nodded, her eyes shining with sincerity. "That's exactly why it's special, Steve, because you spoke from your heart. I'd shut myself off from everyone, didn't want to face anyone, but your voice was like a spark, making me cry again. Not from sadness, but because I saw I still had a reason to try." And I did. The audience began to let out soft awe, a few wiping their eyes. Steve sat up straighter, his thumb grazing the cross as if seeking comfort. "So what did you do after that?" he asked, his voice deeper, wanting to know the story didn't just end with fleeting emotion. Karoline smiled, a smile full of pride. "I started over, Steve. Not immediately. I'm not a superhero, but the next day I opened the window, let the light in. I called my family, told them I was okay. I wrote out a new plan, found a way back into politics. Then I joined the president's team, worked tirelessly, and got to where I am today. It all started that night with you, with the faith you passed on without even knowing." Steve shook his head, a faint smile breaking through. "You've got me amazed, Karoline. I'm just a comedy guy, you know? I never thought I could impact someone like you, a young, intelligent person changing the country." She tilted her head, looking at him with steady eyes. "But that's the magic, Steve. You're not just comedy. You speak real truths, touch people when they need it most. For me, you were the one who gave me hope when I had nothing left. You made me believe I could keep going, and I did." Steve looked down at the cross, his fingers gripping it, eyes glistening. "Karoline," he said, his voice breaking, "I don't know what to say anymore. I wear this because it matters to me, but I didn't think it would mean so much to you." She smiled, tears shimmering in her eyes. "It means more than you know, Steve. I'm here to thank you for changing me, for giving me the strength not to give up, and for changing how I see the world." Steve sat still, his hand trembling on the cross, lips pressed tight as if holding back tears. The audience was silent, the air heavy, not with sadness but with the deep connection just revealed. "You've got me all choked up," he whispered, his voice rough.
"I want to hear more." Karoline nodded, her eyes lighting up with determination. "I'll tell you, Steve, because this story isn't just about me, it's about you. About what you bring without even realizing it." Steve Harvey sat there, hand gripping the cross, his breath uneven as if he had just been swept into a whirlwind of emotion.
Karoline Leavitt's story of how he pulled her from the dark still echoed, making his heart race. The audience was dead quiet, the stage lights dimming in reverence to the rawness of this moment. Karoline looked at him, her eyes blazing with resolve as if she knew it was time to take it to the next level. "Steve," she began, her voice low but fierce, "I didn't just come to share an old story. I'm here to say you're the spark lighting the way for young people like me. People who once thought they were nothing in this world.
You didn't just give me hope once. At the White House, when I face pressure, those days I want to quit, I think of you. Not just from a clip, but from how you live, how you stand tall no matter how many times life knocks you down."
Steve let out a choked laugh, tears spilling over.
"You've got me crying too much, Karoline," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm just a storyteller. How am I worth this?" She shook her head, her gaze unwavering. "You're worth it because you're real, Steve. You don't stand on stage pretending. You bring your whole life up there. I feel it every time I see you, even just on a screen. And where I work, when everything's chaotic, when the press tears me apart, I remind myself Steve slept in his car, faced rejection, and he's still here. I have to make it too." Steve leaned back, hand over his mouth, tears hitting the table. The audience began to sob, some hugging each other, eyes red. "You don't know what you're doing to me," he whispered, his voice shaking. "I never thought I'd be someone others looked to like that."
Karoline leaned forward, her voice now brimming with emotion. "But you are, Steve. Don't you see? I'm not the only one out there. Thousands of young people doubt themselves, feel pushed aside. Don't give up because of you. You don't need to know their names, but they know you.
They see you wearing that cross, hear you talk about getting back up, and they believe they can too."
Steve took a deep breath, tears streaming down.
"Karoline, why me?" he asked, his voice almost a plea. "There are so many out there smarter, stronger. Why am I the one chosen for this?" She smiled, her tear-filled eyes shining. "Because you don't try to be anyone but yourself, Steve. You don't pretend to be perfect, don't hide your scars. You wear that cross like it's part of you, and when you talk about faith, I hear truth. Truth from someone who's fallen and risen again. That's the light you bring, not with fancy words, but with who you are."
Steve bowed his head, hands covering his face, shoulders shaking with sobs he could no longer contain.
"You've got me crying now," he said, trying to laugh through the tears. "I've never seen myself like that." She nodded, tears rolling down her cheeks. "But I see it, Steve. And I want you to know you didn't just give me strength to stand. You gave me strength to fight for others." At the White House, every tough call, every battle with the press, I think of you. Not just to get by, but to win, to do right by young people like I once was.
Steve shook his head, tears still falling. "You're breaking me down," he said, his voice breaking. "You talk about faith.
Does it really matter in a place like the White House? With all that chaos, all those challenges?" Karoline looked at him, her eyes blazing with belief. "It's everything, Steve. When it all falls apart, when I'm attacked, faith is what holds me. Not something grand, just a small belief, like your cross. Enough to remind me I'm not alone. You taught me that, not through sermons, but through how you live."
Steve couldn't hold it anymore.
He stood up, stepped forward, arms wide as if he wanted to embrace her entire world. Tears fell freely, the audience holding their breath, no one clapping. The moment was too sacred to disrupt.
"You don't know what you've done," he said, his voice choked, hugging her tightly. "I'm just Steve, but you make me feel bigger than that." She hugged him back, tears soaking his shoulder. And the audience stood there quietly, witnessing this sacred moment. When they pulled apart, Steve looked at her, his hands still touching the cross.
"You're a gift, Karoline," he said, his voice rough. "I never thought I could be part of something this significant, but you made me believe I can, and I'll never forget this moment."
She smiled, her eyes glowing with gratitude. "Neither will I, Steve, because you didn't just give me light. You gave me a family right here, right now. Steve Harvey and Karoline Leavitt stood side by side on the Steve Harvey Show stage, just releasing a warm embrace after a sacred moment that hushed the studio. The audience remained standing, no one sitting, as if wanting to hold on to the connection just forged. The tears on Steve's cheeks had dried, but his eyes still sparkled, reflecting gratitude and pride. Karoline smiled quickly, wiping her tears, her gaze bright with hope and faith. The stage lights softened, as if highlighting the warmth enveloping the room.
Steve took a deep breath, turning to the audience, his hand lightly on the cross. "Folks," he said, his voice now strong, "I've been on this stage for years, met so many people, but today is the greatest gift I've ever received."
He paused, looking at Karoline with a gentle smile.
"This girl, Karoline Leavitt, showed me that what I say, what I believe, isn't just words. It's light, it's hope, it's something that can change an entire generation, and I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart." Karoline nodded, stepping forward slightly, her voice soft but certain. "Steve, I'm the one who needs to thank you. You didn't just give me strength to stand. You gave me a reason to believe we can do more for ourselves and others. And I want everyone here, everyone watching, to know that if he can, if I can, you can too."
Steve laughed, this time a real, easy laugh. "You hear her, folks? This isn't just an interview, it's a call. Young people out there struggling, hear me and Karoline. You're not alone, you're worth it. And if you're still breathing, there's still hope." He raised a hand, emphasizing each word. The audience began to clap, not loud, but slow and emotional, like an agreement. Steve turned to Karoline, his eyes shining. "I want to end today with something special," he said, his voice lowering.
"Let's close our eyes for a moment, not for a long prayer, but to send a thought to those who need us most, the young people lost, needing light. You ready?" Karoline nodded, the audience falling silent too. Steve closed his eyes, hand on the cross, and for a few seconds the studio sank into absolute stillness, a moment of unity and hope. When he opened his eyes, he smiled. "Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Karoline. Today we created something beautiful together." Karoline smiled, waving to the audience. "Thank you, Steve. And thank you, everyone. Keep believing. Keep moving forward." Steve raised a hand in farewell, the stage lights flaring one last time, leaving the image of two people, a host and a young politician, who together ignited a flame of hope that would never extinguish. The story. Talk show host Steve Harvey cries after an emotional message from Karoline Leavitt reflects a deep side of life in the U.S. today, a society filled with pressure, competition, and polarization, but also brimming with stories of hope and human connection. In the narrative, Karoline Leavitt, a young White House press secretary, faces defeat in a congressional election and harsh media criticism over her youth and gender.
Something many young Americans can relate to now, where the pressure to succeed early and societal biases often lead to self-doubt. Steve Harvey, with his cross and words, "If you're still breathing, God's not done with you," becomes a guiding light for Karoline, helping her turn pain into motivation to advocate for the next generation opportunity policy at the White House. The moment they and the audience stand together for struggling youth demonstrates the power of empathy and faith in a nation sometimes divided by politics and culture. The takeaway here is practical. In today's America, when failure and criticism can easily break you, seek out crosses symbols or people like Steve, who bring hope and remind you your worth isn't defined by temporary setbacks. Transform pain into action like Karoline did with her policy. And don't hesitate to connect with community, as seen in Steve and Karoline's hug, to find strength. Ultimately, believe, as Steve says, every breath is a chance for a fresh start, no matter where you are in this challenging American society. If Steve and Karoline's story inspired you, hit that subscribe button to join us in spreading hope for the next generation. Thanks for being here, and see you in the next video with even more meaningful moments. If you liked this video, leave a like, subscribe, and help us bring you more exciting stories involving celebrities. Here you will be updated every day on the world of celebrities. See you soon.